Hello. So I have a very big panel of like 6 people, so I'm just going to ask them all to come out now, and then we can do introductions after that instead of making it like a football lineup. Also, for some reason, I have the smallest chair, which is awkward. Hello, everyone. So I could introduce all of them, but I fear I will mangle at least half the names. So if you guys could please introduce yourselves and tell us what you're working on right now while you're doing that, please. Starting with you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kjartan Emilsson, and CEO and co-founder of Sulfur Studios. We're a small VR startup here in Reykjavik, 2 years old now. We have already launched one experience called Everest VR, and we're currently working on our second product that is a adventure puzzle solver called the Godling that will be out next year sometime.
Hi, my name is Tommy Palm. I'm one of the founders and the CEO of a company called Resolution Games. It's focusing primarily on mobile VR games. We have released a game called Bait that is on Samsung Gear VR, and we are working on another title called Wonderglade for the up-and-coming Daydream platform.
Yeah, so I'm Hrafn Thorisson. I am the CEO of Aldin Dynamics. We've been doing VR exclusively since 2013, and it feels like a lifetime. We've worked with all of the major platform holders. We deployed a game with Oculus Studios, and are now recently deployed Waltz of the Wizard for the HTC Vive. And what we do at Aldin since the beginning has been focusing on what can we do that's never been possible now that people can feel like they're inside a virtual world and use their own head and hands and move around. And once you start doing content like that, it changes the entire game. And there's a whole new range of design challenges in doing that powerfully and enabling that powerful experience like you're in another world. So what we're working on now are tools to help developers and content creators overcome those challenges. Like what does it mean when people are now physically moving around and interacting? And so that's what we're doing now, a tool for content creators to help overcome challenges.
My name is Andre, and I'm an entrepreneur. I've started 3 companies, been involved in 3 companies, 2 exits. I work as a consultant today, telling companies about technology trends because I teach technology trends. I'm not so much in gaming specifically, but I'm in everything that relates to technology. And there's so much disruption coming now that I have clients that are coming to me and asking me what's going on, and I will tell them what the fuck is going on. Working in academia at the Reykjavik University is really handy. It's really good if you're a technical consultant because you can see all the trends, and I can do research. I have like 90 students. 80 to 90 students write research papers about emerging technology that I have to read every year. So I get a lot of really good stuff from them. So.
Hey, my name is Dominic Escoffier. I'm a huge gaming and virtual reality enthusiast. That's why this panel is almost perfect for me. I've started as a games editor. I've switched to a small publisher called Rockstar Games. I was working there for 2 years on GTA 5, for example, and on the next project that I unfortunately can't talk about. And through my work in the games industry, I had the chance to meet Paul Malucky and Nate Mitchell when they were still a 5-man team at Oculus and try their duct tape prototype of the Rift. That was in 2012, and ever since then I've been a huge VR enthusiast. I did my best to push the medium as good as I could. I've co-founded the Oculus subreddit, which is the largest unofficial community for virtual reality on the web. I co-founded a non-profit organization called EUVR, which is pushing the envelope for virtual reality developers in Europe. And then late last year, I quit my job at Rockstar Games to go all in with virtual reality, which some of my friends said I'm bloody stupid to do that, but I do believe in the medium. And I had my own VR company. I was the CEO of Realities.io. That's an app where you can visit places all around the world with photorealistic detail. And when we came back from the States, so we did an accelerator program in the States. When I came back, NVIDIA came around and said they're searching for someone to build their European virtual reality business. And since I was doing that on the side mostly in my free time, I'm actually now getting paid for doing exactly that, pushing the medium, making sure virtual reality is growing, not only on the continent in Europe, but also on the outer rims, as I say here in Iceland, and I'm really looking forward to this panel.
So mine will be the shortest because I have the advantage of just giving a talk previously, so you kind of know who I am already. But I should probably go back a little bit in time, so I might be one of the dinosaurs here at the conference. I started, my first game was EverQuest back in 1998, so I have experience working in this medium, obviously not VR back then, but these large-scale worlds that become real and become part of your, you know, your being, right? So my experience goes back to EverQuest, and more recently, before joining Crytek, I was working for an indie developer in London called Splash Damage on some pretty cool games. But my role, as I've already spoke about at Crytek, is to push the engine, and we are very dedicated to VR. As you saw from some of the clips that I showed, we believe that this is an exciting industry to be part of, and we are fully investing in it, and we hope to be part of this exciting ride.
Thanks, George. Thanks, everyone. It occurs to me I should have probably introduced myself as well. So as Chelsea said, my name is Leo. I am a journalist. I work at The Economist. Before I joined The Economist, I used to write about technology for Quartz, which is an American business news website, which is why I'm here. So now, as you've heard from our panelists, it's quite a nice, sort of varied bunch of people. The problem with this panel is the topic. I mean, it's both a problem and an opportunity. It's called VR and gaming, but this whole conference is about VR and gaming. So that gives us a nice chance to tie everything together, I think. But it also gives us a chance to sort of go off in other directions and cover things we haven't covered. What I'm not going to do, because as you heard with the introductions, getting 6 people to answer a single question, one after the other, takes about 5 minutes and can get a little dull. So instead, I'm going to aim my questions at a particular person or just open it to the floor and try and keep this moving fast. If at any time you start getting bored, please start booing or just in some way indicate so that we can move things along. No, I'm serious. Stand up, wave your hands, because I can't actually see very well. Anyway, I'll stop rambling on. Tommy. What Tommy was too modest to tell you in his introduction is that he was also responsible for the mobile version of Candy Crush games. You could thank him for that. You could blame him for wasting hours of your life. I know it wasted hours of my life. But before that, I found this article when I was looking up various people for this panel doing the research. I found this article that you'd written. It didn't have a date on it, but I can only assume it was pre-2007, in which you talked about how mobile phones are these things we only use to make phone calls, but in this sort of magical future, we'll all have these pocket-sized consoles that we can play multiplayer games on, MMOs on. Using that as a framework, what sort of article would you write today about what's going to be in our pockets 10 years from now?
Wow. 10 years from now, I don't think we'll have anything in our pockets. That's one of the reasons why I'm very excited about mobile VR. I think the reason why we're carrying around this rather uncomfortable square right now is because we wanted a big screen, screen size to watch videos of cats and other vital things to our life, and that's going to be projected somehow into our eyes or overlaid on the world, and it's going to be much comfortable and very much more accessible. And I just have to say, I had a small part in being part of Candy Crush. There was other very talented people involved in that as well, of course. The article that you're referring to, I think it's Gamma Sutra in 2003.
2003.
And
right.
I was at that point very much involved in online games. I had a background of being very interested in accessible multiplayer, and I was hoping that we'd see much more of that type of engaged games like EverQuest that was mentioned here before on mobile. But I think maybe mobile VR is one of those opportunities when we can go in and really interact with our friends in a virtual world.
One of the things I should say is that even though I'm, for the next 40 minutes or 35 minutes that we're on the stage, I'm just going to be using VR, but you should interpret that to mean VR or AR or whatever you like. And you should feel free to also make those distinctions quite clearly, especially if you think I'm full of shit at any point. Was there anything about developing a game like Candy Crush that has lessons for developing games in mobile VR?
Yeah, I think one of my biggest takeaway, I started in 99 with mobile games, and I struggled as an entrepreneur for a really long time before it took off and became a viable market to get the money, the investments back. One of the things that was so fantastic to see with Candy Crush was how many people that potentially were gamers that was out there. We managed to transform a lot of people who were saying like, I don't play games, my kids play games, and now all of a sudden there was 500 million people that loved to interact with their smartphone and just entertain themselves with that. And I think that's one of the things that I'm very excited about with VR as well, that we now have reached maybe 1 billion and 1.5 billion people with games, but there's still about 5 billion or something left in the world which are potential gamers, and I think we're going to reach them eventually. It's
very interesting you say that about sort of all these untapped gamers, and this next question is for anyone who wants to jump in. So Nintendo is an example of a console company that with the Wii said there's all these people who don't know that they want consoles and that they are gamers, but if we give them the right thing, maybe they will. It's the same as, not the same, but it's a similar argument as with mobile games. But Nintendo also says that it's probably too early for VR. We were discussing this downstairs before this panel, that it's just the very beginning. So anyone jump in. Where are we now? Is it still too early? At what point does it go mass market, and what is George?
Yeah, so I think there's two answers to that question, right? So is it too early for the consumers, or is it too early for the developers? Because I think it's important for developers to learn and to evolve their techniques and get their experiences right. So it's kind of like relearning how to do game development over again, because the experiences. Sure, there are a lot of things that are still the same, right? You still have to test the game, you still have to write code, but it's a different experience, right? So I was explaining this during my talk previously, that with Crytek, we went through a lot of tech demos before we actually were comfortable building the game, The Climb, right? So we had lessons learned, motion sickness was a problem, getting that immersive experience was a problem. So I think for developers, it's definitely not too early. You want to get in, maybe not put all of your investment in it, right? But you want to get in, you want to learn, you want to iterate, and you want to develop your skills so that when the consumer side actually develops and builds up, you'll be the front runners, right? And you'll have the greatest content, which is going to push the envelope. Consumer side's another question, right? Where we're still waiting to see, right? The back end needs to grow bigger, I think, for us to make money on the development side.
Yeah, I think there's another aspect to this that is interesting right now, and it's the fact that there was a certain assumption in the VR market that the consumers would be in a way different in how they consume the VR games and experiences, and it seems to be that like from the first experience now of the first few months of being commercial. That this early adopter market is really looking at these games and experiences as they were for normal PC experiences. So they do, for example, have an assumptions about length of gameplay. And this is a problem for developers because if you want to create a content that is goes into multi-hours of gameplay, that's obviously a very big budget proposals. And that's kind of difficult for most smaller startups. So it sort of also puts some constraints on the genres that you can actually do. And I think there are interesting opportunities there because I mean, you can either go for repeatable experiences, a little bit like Gunjack is something that you can go always back and forth. But obviously, like user-created content, like Tiltbrush is something that seems to be working, and I guess that Minecraft might go that way. And but finally, and maybe the most important, I think, in the near future is going to be people, because I mean, like I remember when I was working at CCP, we always said that our main content was people, and it's the cheapest content. And I think that's going to be a very interesting path for developers to actually tap into this. And I'm hopeful that it will come in a couple of years.
Hrafn, you also, before you start, I want you also to address metrics, because I know you're working on analytics, and as George was saying, you know, developers need to start iterating and this and that. What are we trying to figure out, and are there new analytics or metrics that we need to have in order to figure out what's working in VR?
Absolutely. I mean, in my mind, the core about why VR is so revolutionary is because it transports you physically to another world. And you asked about whether we were at a point where VR was here already. And in my mind, motion controllers and being able to physically move around, we have reached that baseline for this is the promise that we were given 3 years ago, that VR was coming and it was here. That's the baseline that we're reaching with platforms like HTC Vive that have room scale, where you can move physically around. And that's definitely there, but there are also a lot of economic challenges, and like the hardware is expensive, and there are limitations, and that's fine, but we are there. We're seeing it both in the metrics that user retention is here. People feel like motion controllers and moving around, that makes it so compelling. That's what we wanted to see. We didn't just want to get the goggles alone and just look at a world. We wanted a world that was interactive, that felt believable, like reality. And that's where I think the entire industry is going, whether it's mobile or not. Mobile will get positional tracking. Mobile will get hand tracking, because that's also what makes this medium so accessible. My mother, who's 70 years old, she can go into our Walls of the Wizard game and immediately start interacting. She's never touched a gamepad in her life, and she never will. And I don't want her to. I want her to naturally interact with a world that's believable, that's convincing, where things react to you. And you can hear from everything I'm saying, there's a long way to go in terms of making software that compelling. We need AI, we need better simulations. But at the same time, we're also seeing that that type of content is what's most commercially successful today. It's the content that makes people come back. It's that feeling of being in another world and believing it.
And how do we measure that? How do we measure it as we sort of?
Yeah. So there's a lot of new factors. Think of it this way: we're not designing games anymore. We're designing realities. So that means we need to keep in mind, like, how tall are the users? We have a table in Walls of the Wizard that's this high. What about people who can't look up at the table? Because these are like physical constraints, and we need to start thinking about software development in that way. What are the physical constraints? What about if someone is disabled? Can he use your game? What about how far they can move around in their room space? That's a huge issue right now. Like, how many have like many meters to move around? So all of these design challenges that relate to that human presence, that human element in your content. How tall are they? How fast are they moving? How do disabilities impact their ability to interact with the virtual world? All of these are factors that we need to start paying attention to.
Andrew, sorry, George.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one quick sort of retort to that. I absolutely agree with something that you said there about the content, right? It's all about the content, because it is, and it's learning how to make this content more compelling, right? And in this new medium, right? Something that we've done, and I know that we've been talking to you guys about this, is our VR First labs. And this is not a plug for VR First, but it's a plug more for at the education level, right? So getting the hardware into the hands of these students and really letting them experiment with it, and also develop new techniques, you know, even perfect hardware, and give the feedback. I think because, you know, I guess I can leave you guys with a quote. Maybe in 2020 you can pull it up again. But I think, you know, the content that's going to make VR sort of mainstream and a huge success probably hasn't been created yet, right? So we need young developers, old developers to keep on trying stuff, and that needs to be made simpler, right? As you said, the hardware is not available. So we need NVIDIA, we need AMD, we need Oculus to contribute hardware to the ecosystem so that people don't have that limitation.
I'd like to come back to that, George, about it not having been developed yet. But first, very quickly from Andre, especially regarding what Hrafn was saying. Sorry, I'm mangling your name, actually. Andre, can you tell me what is the role of academia in answering those questions?
Yeah, Reykjavik University, that's where I work. Yeah, it's super important because academia always comes before all the research papers that nobody can understand because they're so technical and with lots of formulas that only academics can understand. But they actually have a lot of really, really good research, so they always comes first. And some of the projects that I've been watching my colleagues do in Reykjavik University is to solve the problems of immersion. For example, if you're interacting with a character, how real is this character? Can you hold a conversation with this character? Do they move do their expression, gestures, are they real? Are they believable? And then when you come back, and this is also why AI is super important in this, when you meet a virtual character, and you meet the character again, you want them to remember, not like some of the early games where they were stupid all the time. Right. So you want them to learn. So academia is super important in this, and the research that I've seen is very much linked to AI. There's another project that I followed in Aalto University in Helsinki, and people there so Reykjavik University, they're kind of looking at the mind, the AI, and putting that into virtual environments, really cool stuff. Then in Aalto University, the friends that I have there, they're doing with the body. So they're trying to figure out how does a body or some character, how do they move in a believable way? So the immersion becomes believable. So the academia is really important.
Sorry, Dominic, go on.
I actually wanted to chime into that. When the first virtual reality wave back in the 90s came around, we were thinking that it's there. Virtual reality is going to happen. And then the whole buzz stopped, the whole hype stopped. But going back to your point, that really fueled a lot of research in academia. So the whole scene was more or less gone from a consumer, from an enterprise point of view. But for academia, virtual reality was always there because they had huge caves, they had proper tracking systems that were way out of the range that a normal consumer can pay. But we're actually tapping into the resources, into the research now. So all the research that's been done for the last 20 years is helping Oculus, for example, now, or HTC now, to come up with devices that are tackling all these problems that have been identified over the course of the last couple of years. And it's still going on. Research and development is so important for virtual reality. Things like light field displays, for example, where NVIDIA is also putting a lot of effort into, or things like proper tracking systems where you aren't bound to a certain size. Those things will enable us to go for virtual reality content that we can only dream of right now, and that will be those kind of killer apps where we will be talking about in 20 years and saying, hey, this and that technological step made it possible. So that is very interesting for me as a tech interested person to see the two things intertwining, the tech and the content. So that is really, really important.
So there was one thing, sorry, I'll come back to you. There was one thing that Andre said that I wanted to pick up on, which is how real are these characters? How real are their movements, their bodies, and so on? And I was reading about Kjartan and about Everest VR, and there was this lovely line in The Verge. I'll read it out. I wrote it down. It said, art doesn't have to imitate real life, only evoke it. And this is for anybody. It's kind of how real does it have to be is my question. Not how real does it have to be, but how real does it have to be? Does it have to be real?
I think we did a game back in 2013 called Asunder. One of the first things that we wanted to do was to see how we could route players in the virtual world by having interactive characters there. And our characters were relatively simple. We did this in a short amount of time, and the technology was only so far along. But even just having a character in the seat behind you, and he's observing where you're looking, and when he's talking, if you're not paying attention, he gets angry, and pulls your attention back to him. He maintains eye contact. All of these were really powerful in their own, even though there wasn't much depth to any more interactions. Just being able to interrupt him with your own physical actions, or seeing that he's noticing where you're looking and stuff like that. All of this superficial stuff is really powerful, let alone when we start doing like more contextual understanding of how you're moving and how you're behaving and reading your body language and reacting to it. That's going to be amazing.
It's really subtle cues.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, talking about Everest, this is one of the anecdotes that I often like to mention, because I was kind of a little bit mind blown when I heard that. Basically a guy that went through the experience and started talking about afterwards that he was really impressed. And he started describing the boot that he was wearing in the game. And I pointed out to him that we don't actually have any boots rendered in the game. And he was convinced that he had saw his own boots. He even had a collar on them. So in this case, it shows that, even though we're talking about virtual reality and a lot of technology to sort of like recreate the reality in a very high fidelity, we should never underestimate the mind's theater, where you can actually very easily evoke things, and that will be even more real when they're created. And I think virtual reality is extremely powerful to do that. So, like you said, it doesn't need to be completely 100% real. It just needs to evoke it.
So I was talking to Sascha Unseld of the Oculus Story Studio, I think it's called. They're the guys who make the movies for Oculus. And he was talking about the very first time he experienced VR. And he said it was terrible. It was really crappy. And he didn't enjoy it at all. But then on his way home, when he was driving home, he was thinking about this crappy experience. And he remembers it not as a crappy thing that he saw, but as a crappy thing that he did. And I think that's precisely what you're describing. It's your brain's ability to fill in those gaps. Sorry, George, you wanted to...
I just wanted to make a quick comment. And, I figured sooner or later someone would go to the Pokemon Go example, but...
I was going to bring you to the
Pokemon
Go example.
Sorry, I jumped on that. No. So I think to answer your question, I think Pokemon Go shows that non-real AR can be powerful and can give people that experience, maybe a gateway into that experience, But obviously my presentation was about ultra-realism and immersive worlds, So I think both can be successful. Obviously, it's a personal preference as well, right? So you see a lot, there's millions and millions of people enjoying Pokemon Go, even though I bet you half people turn off the AR because it's easier to swipe when you don't have it on, right? For example.
Can I add just one thing? Because I think that's one of the magical things about VR, is that when you reach the point, so you were talking about hyperrealism, like in the climb, and in Everest it's a similar thing. I think one is the nice thing is that when you manage to put people into this complete conviction that it is in a real world that behaves physically and predictably, it is then so magical to break the laws a little bit. And we had that like by accident in Everest when we had the flags. At some point somebody forgot to put the gravity flag on the flag. So when you left it, it suddenly like floated in the air very gently, and you could just like poke at it. And it was a completely magical moment. Obviously, we couldn't really put it in a game, but it was one of the things that was accidentally fun, because you were completely anchored in a real, virtual reality, and then suddenly it's magic.
Right. It's kind of like a good Rushdie novel. Tommy, for you, but there's two aspects to this. One is George was mentioning Pokemon Go, and I want to know how we will play almost precisely the same sort of game, but without having to look at this square that you were talking about earlier. And the other is sort of more broad, which is simple, casual, multi-user games. Like, what do they look like? Do they look like Pokemon Go, or what are the other sort of mechanics we could be using? What are the other sort of stories or incentives or engines that we could be using? How would we define that?
Well, I think that VR and AR are quite different things in this aspects. I mean, I definitely believe strongly in location-based games in AR, where you can enhance and do something on your way to work. Or that's an excellent use case scenario for AR games. Whereas virtual reality is more of a console type of experience where you have in your room or in your sofa. And I think one of the things that I believe that there is a lot of room for is kids that can very easily access an online world with their friends and just hang out. The book Ready Player One is a really inspiring fictional book on a dark future.
I think that's a good opportunity. We're sort of 29 minutes into our 40 minutes, so I realize we should get on with it. So I think that's a good opportunity to move on into slightly broader themes. And Kjartan, I think I'll start with you, or Tommy, either one of you, or anyone really. But going back to Everest VR, it makes me think about what exactly gaming really is. I mean, you have games where you shoot people up, and then you have these experiences. Will there be, in either VR or AR or both, sort of new forms of gaming altogether?
Well, I think that's something that we're still discovering, basically. I mean, when we chose to do Everest VR, we all come from a gaming background, and we chose to do that as a sort of exercise and style for us to see how can you do experiences that feel immersive and real. And so we didn't gamify it a lot. And to a point, we think that it is something that will develop more and more. But I'm not sure it's going to be the same market as you have today of the early adopters. But generally, when I see, like, I've done a lot of trade shows where you show this to people, and I think in that case you get a much broader type of people that are trying, and usually which are not hardcore gamers, and they seem to like that kind of experiences. So I think when the market gets broader, I think the experiential genre is going to be something significant, and also in terms of in academia and in schools, there's a lot of educational potential there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things that really excites me about VR is that this is something that you can use for a lot of other things in games. I think games are going to be leading it a lot in the beginning, and in VR is essentially it's game technology. Even if you're using it for education or for any other, like just communication, you're still building virtual tables, characters, voice acting, and everything that good games companies, that's their core business. But it can be so much more. And as you were saying, when you show this to people who are not gamers, they instantly understand. It's very, very accessible in a way that
very
it's
intuitive.
Yes, it can be. So I hope it's not, VR is too important to be wasted on a handful of gamers.
Andrea and George, I see you're both aching to say something.
Can I jump on this? So if you compare VR, so we are very early in VR, and if you look at any product VR is a platform. So if you look at the smartphone as a platform, the PC as a platform, the internet as a platform, it's always two-wave cycles that products develop or platforms develop. First cycle, we are in that cycle now, and that is when people take anything they know from the past, the old models, in this case, the old games, and try to cram them into this new platform. And that will be the first wave. And then people will realize, hey, we can do so much more. And they will start to invent something that didn't exist on the previous platform, something new. So that, and I predict this is just going to happen to VR as well, as a platform.
I think, sorry, George, just to comment on that, I think you're absolutely right. I've been thinking a little bit about storytelling in VR. I've been speaking to people who are trying to make movies rather than games. And one of the ways they say to think about it is, the problem with, exactly as you say, you take a new platform and you retrofit it with old ways of doing things. So early cinema was either spectacle, like a train coming at you, that was one of the first movies, or it was based on theater, where there was a lot of melodrama and shouting.
Yeah, the first web pages were like brochures or magazines or something
GeoCities,
like that.
right? Like basing it on real locations. This whole you carry those metaphors on. Anyway, one of the things that the guys I spoke to said was that actually you need to skip movies, forget about movies if you want to tell stories in VR, and think about it much more like immersive theater. I don't know if any of you have been to Punch Drunk, but you go into these places, into these buildings, and there's theater going on. You can't influence what's happening, but you are part of it nonetheless. And I thought that was a very nice metaphor for it. Sorry, George, you
No,
were...
I just wanted to get back to your original question about the experiences and whether, they have to be games. And I see some crossover ideas, right? So we have some developers that are working on exercise type games, right? Where their idea was to make it enjoyable to exercise, right? So just without going into too many details, it's riding a bike, right? But to make it more VR and more immersive and more like a game in a way, you add it to a world and you have a game, right? So these are non-game developers, but they've come out with this idea to work on exercise VR. So I think there's crossovers, right? So
Right.
I think that's where we're going.
I totally agree. The crossover between the different ways of storytelling is going to be very, very interesting. And I do think that there is already some type of new kind of storytelling happening. So for example, one of the things that I always say, and you probably heard this before, is we're inventing a new language for virtual reality. So we have to come up with a new language of how to tell stories, how to make sure the viewer is looking in the right direction, how do you use audio cues, for example, so that someone turns their head and sees the person speaking to them. And one of the examples that I always use is the work that Noni de la Peña is doing with her studio.
Yeah.
She's doing immersive journalism. So Leo, that's probably one of those things that's interesting to you. And she's essentially not doing games. It's not really an experience, but it's more of you are a viewer in a certain situation. So one of the most compelling experiences, and I'm not ashamed to say I shed a tear when I was going through that experience, was a piece about domestic violence, and it was a very basic CGI rendering of a trailer park somewhere in the suburbs in America. And the way she tells the story is she uses original audio from the 911 call that was coming in at that day. So it's a situation where the husband of a wife is threatening her with a gun,
right.
And you're essentially, so there's these virtual characters standing around you. Very basic CGI, but the audio is completely original. It's a live recording of that 911 call, and being able to see something like that as an immersive theater is very, very powerful. And I think she's gonna push the envelope and be an example for so many storytellers out there that want to tell stories that go beyond the typical documentary stuff that we already know from TV, from movies, and so on and so forth.
Sorry, I just had to jump in. I think there's one concern there, though, because like when we were designing the climb, we went through a lot of different iterations. Like, do you want to have the realism of someone falling and dying, right? So I think, and we've seen games like horror games where you scare the shit out of people, right? And it's like, I think that's I mean, it's going to happen, and it is happening, but I think people's experiences are going to be shared differently, but they're not going to all be, wanting to experience that. It's quite scary.
It is very intense, definitely.
I think there's sort of two sides to that, right? On the one hand, there's a great scope for empathy. It's my job to read the news. I read a lot of news, and I frankly am a little bit over like a lot of the carnage and misery that happens in the world because it's just constant. But if you're immersed in it, it would be very hard to ignore that. So on the one hand, you could argue that's a good thing. It would make us all better human beings. On the other hand, you could also argue that there's a great deal of scope for manipulation if you can do something like that.
Yeah, the desensitization might be even stronger if you manage to overcome your empathy and shoot somebody in a virtual reality shooter. You might be working even more against the empathy.
Oh no, now you sound like those guys who were blaming Marilyn Manson in 1997.
I always like to point out when people start talking about, can we do movies in VR? Can we do games in VR? I always like to point out that these terms are really colored for us. We have a really strong idea about what a game is. But what we're really talking about here is that this is a new medium. We are able to replicate things that feel like real life. And then the question starts to be, well, what can we do that's fun in there? And is that a game? Can we tell stories in there? It's about just right now, it's about figuring out what's fun to do, what's scary to do, what's interesting. And then we can work from there to define what we really mean. And that's the language that we were talking about.
Yeah.
To describe what we just made. Because it's a really, VR is the most powerful way to mediate experience over everything else. And whether that experience, what that feels like, depends on what you're trying to get across, whether it's a story or it's a repetition of actions that feel more like a conventional game. All of this is possible.
So, guys, I have been given the 5-minute signal, and that was about 2 minutes ago. So I'm going to cut to my very last question. Before I do that, I should use this opportunity, talking about immersive journalism in VR, to point out that The Economist also has a VR app and some VR journalism. Please go check it out. I think my boss will be very happy with me for bringing that up.
Last minute plug, very nice.
All right, my final question, and any one of you or two of you, until they kick us off the stage, can jump in. We've been talking about what happens in a couple of years, in 5 years, in 10 years. I want to know what the world that we're living in will look like in 2050, halfway down the century.
2050 or 2015?
2050, and by that I don't mean at dinner time tonight.
So the things that Hollywood has been talking about are probably quite close to what I expect in the year 2050. So for example, when you think of movies like Matrix, I think it's probably not going to be a plug that we put in the back of our neck, but it's going to be a way of working with our senses directly. So giving direct input to our senses is something that I think is going to be the next step for virtual reality, because we're always trying to go into to tap into all of the different senses. So we got visual covered, we got haptics covered, audio is covered, but you also want to have things like heat, touch, the feeling of movement through a space, and all these different things are very, very hard from a technological perspective to get them all together. It would actually be easier to tap right into the synapses and do something like that's like straight to your brain. It might sound a little bit scary, but that's what I'd expect in 30 years down the line.
Look, no one here is going to come back to you in 33, 34 years.
You will come back to me, and you will quote me on having a check back in the back of your neck. So.
But I mean, I tend to agree with you. I don't like the idea very much, but I tend to agree that it seems inevitable that we end up with some sort of, if nothing else, at least like contact implants or something, right? Yeah. George?
No, I was going to say something which is a little bit depressing, I think, actually. It's
good, that's a good note to end on. Let's go with depressing.
It's the anti-socialism aspect of this, which we see now with our kids, and where everyone is connected to a device, right? So I think one of the things that it's going to happen even sooner than 2050 is people are not going to leave their homes, right? People are going to go, there's going to be ecotourism, right? Instead of coming to Iceland, there's going to be the experience of doing the glacier from your, sofa, So in a way, that's really cool, and that's what we want to do. But in a way, it's also a little bit depressing, right? Because we need to experience the wonders of the, outdoors, for example.
At least it'll be cheaper, George.
People have been saying this.
Right. Cheaper, yeah,
but people have been saying this for many years. In sort of in the 60s, people were saying that by the turn of the century, we will not travel anymore. We will just go on devices, and so it didn't happen then. I'm not sure if it's going to happen, but I know we're probably going to have iPhone 25 or something by that year. But
it's true. I mean, Socrates, or one of those Greeks, was complaining about how writing things down was going to make everybody really stupid because we wouldn't have to remember anything anymore. So someone's always going to be complaining about technology. Anyway, guys, I got to stop you before they throw us off. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for not booing.
Thank you.